The mall had always been a place she walked through, never one she walked into. As a child, she passed it on the way to the bus stop, its polished glass and glowing storefronts like a world inside a snow globe. On weekends, she'd sit outside its edge with a bag of warm food from the cart her mother worked, watching well-dressed people drift in and out beneath branded lights. It didn't feel like envy. It felt like distance. Like a language she didn't yet speak. Her first job inside was in the food court, behind the register of a frozen yogurt stand. She wasn't old enough to work legally, so they paid her under the table and kept her behind the machines. Her hands moved fast, her smile faster. She learned people's orders by their footsteps. Knew who tipped, who didn't. Who saw her and who looked through her. No one remembered her name. She remembered all of theirs. Years passed. She took night shifts and morning classes, managing receipts by day and lectures by night. The mall stayed constant. Renovated. Repainted. Rebranded. But still standing. Still echoing with the click of heels and distant music. She'd learned its heartbeat. Knew its flaws. Where the ceiling dripped during storms. Where security never checked. Which stores made money and which just made noise. She didn't hate the mall. She studied it. Watched it bleed tenants during recessions. Watched local shops replaced by big chains and those chains collapse under online competition. She saw the spaces empty out like lungs between seasons. And she waited. The idea didn't come like a lightning bolt. It came like a whisper. A landlord out of state growing tired of holding a sinking ship. A bankruptcy filing buried 3 pages deep in a legal notice. A phone call. A number. Then another. And one day, a silence. Which meant negotiation was possible. By then, she was ready. Years of quiet work had turned into capital. Her tech consultancy had grown under the radar, built on efficiency and discipline, not marketing. She didn't throw parties. She didn't wear logos. But she moved money like an engineer moves pressure where it needed to go without waste. She formed a shell company. Opened escrow. Requested structural assessments. And waited. The mall was still functioning barely. Shops clung to its bones like stubborn ivy. On a rainy Tuesday, she walked inside not as a visitor but as a shadow of what was coming. She browsed deliberately, her hands tracing fabrics, her eyes scanning every crack in the tile, every smudge on the railing. And when she entered the boutique with the dress, she didn't walk like a customer. She walked like a cartographer mapping. The cashier didn't recognize her. The security guard saw only posture, not power. And when she was told, sharply, that she couldn't pay, something quiet inside her clicked into alignment. Not from offense. From confirmation. They didn't see her. That meant they hadn't seen her coming. Perfect. Outside the store, she stood at the atrium railing. Looked down at the food court where she once poured yogurt and counted tips. Tomorrow, she'd be back. But not through the front entrance. Through the executive lot. Because the closing documents were ready. And in 24 hours, the mall would stop being a fortress she pressed her face against. And become something else entirely. Her blueprint. Her engine. Her name. The contract was 142 pages. She read every line. Every clause buried beneath legacy debt. Every restriction tied to defunct anchor tenants. Every obligation to local tax credits and state renovation grants. She understood that buying a mall wasn't glamorous, it was granular. It meant absorbing risk, balancing leases, and holding breath through economic tides. But it also meant control. And she had waited her entire life for the chance to shape something from the inside out. The deal closed at 9:03 a.m. on a Thursday. No ribbon cutting. No media presence. Just a quiet signature in a glass office 3 states away. On screen, her lawyer smiled and offered congratulations. She said nothing. Only nodded once and ended the call. Outside, the mall's parking lot blinked under the morning sun. Shoppers trickled in through the revolving doors, unaware that the ground beneath their feet had changed owners in the span of seconds. She stood near the back loading bay, hidden in plain sight. Watching. Not observing the mall. Assessing the pulse. The boutique that told her she couldn't pay opened as usual. The same staff. The same mannequins. The same dress still on display. She didn't go inside. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked the full loop of the second floor, clipboard in hand, noting lighting inconsistencies, rent delinquency notices posted behind display counters, expired fire extinguisher tags in hallway glass cases. She spoke with no one. But everyone watched her. Not because they recognized her, but because something in her presence didn't fit. Too quiet. Too focused. Too sure. She moved like someone who didn't need permission. Because she didn't. By afternoon, she met with the facility manager. Not to introduce herself, but to issue first orders. Maintenance schedule overhaul. Lease reevaluations. A 60-day audit of all retail spaces categorized by sustainability, foot traffic, and debt load. A list of vendors who would not be renewed. At the bottom of that list was the boutique that once told her she didn't belong. Not as punishment, as precedent. Because architecture wasn't just concrete. It was attitude. And the tone of the mall would be rewritten starting there. The next morning, she returned again unannounced. This time with a structural engineer, an architect, and a former tenant who ran a failing kiosk 5 years ago and now operated a design firm thanks to a microloan she once issued anonymously. They walked the corridors together, making notes, dreaming aloud, not of luxury, but of equity. Of repurposing dead corners into maker spaces. Of reopening shuttered wings as incubators. Of turning the former Anchor department store into a co-op of local food vendors and cultural galleries. Not for aesthetics. For survival. For community. For power redistributed by brick and beam. That evening, she sat in the last booth of the food court, a tray of dumplings in front of her, steam curling against her glasses. She looked around. The mall no longer looked untouchable. It looked possible. Not finished, but finally hers. Construction began without fanfare. No gold shovels. No press releases. No executives in hard hats posing for photographers. Just scaffolding, tape, dust, and noise. Real noise. The sound of walls being stripped bare, of ceilings open to expose the decades of rot and neglect. The sound of a building being taken apart not to destroy, but to reveal what it had forgotten. She was there every morning before sunrise. Blueprints under her arm. Coffee in a dented thermos. Walking the empty corridors before contractors arrived, tracing each corner, checking notes, pointing out the details no one else had caught, flooring transitions that would become hazards, light angles that would wash out the new signage. Forgotten alcoves that could become reading nooks or pop-up stalls. To her, this wasn't renovation. It was restoration. Not to what it was, but to what it always could have been. The boutique closed within 3 weeks. A quiet notice on the window. No sale. No clearance. Just gone. Replaced within a month by a co-designed retail incubator. Rotating local makers. No commissions. No startup fees. Just space. And the dress that once stood in a velvet-lit display? It now hung behind plexiglass, not for sale, but for memory. A reminder of how perception ages in real time. A reminder that ownership was never about appearance. It was about endurance. She invited no reporters. But they came anyway. Drawn by the rumor, the mall that shouldn't have survived was breathing again. They asked for interviews. She declined. Told them to talk to vendors instead. To ask the women running kiosks how it felt to sign leases that didn't bankrupt them. To ask the artists now painting the food court ceiling how it felt to be commissioned for something permanent. To ask the janitor how it felt to have healthcare. One story went viral. It wasn't about her. It was about a teenager from a nearby school who started selling recycled tech accessories at one of the new pop-up stalls and used the earnings to pay his mother's rent. A second story followed. Then a third. Then the city took notice. Not the government, the people. And they started coming back. Not just to shop, but to stay. To sit. To breathe. To feel something different in the air. In the midst of it all, she kept working. There were budgets to manage, partnerships to draft, risks to measure, and systems to replace. But she never stopped walking the mall. Not to inspect. To remember. Because every corner had once reminded her of how small the world wanted her to feel. Now every corner reminded her of how quietly she had overturned it. One corridor at a time. The mall was no longer a destination. It was a rhythm. A loop of lives passing through and returning, not to consume, but to belong. The food court once filled with chain vendors was now a multicultural gallery of flavors run by people who once thought a storefront was out of reach. Their recipes weren't corporatized, they were ancestral. Served on handwritten menus. Cooked on burners that had fed entire neighborhoods before they ever found stainless steel. The escalators, once sluggish and broken, now carried kids with sketchbooks, elders with rolling carts, students seeking Wi-Fi in warm corners. There were classrooms in old shoe stores. Podcasters recording from what used to be a perfume counter. One corner became a childcare co-op. Another, a sewing lab. She hadn't just bought them all. She had reprogrammed it. But with growth came scrutiny. Not from the people. From the ones who didn't understand how it worked without their permission. Developers sent offers. Mergers were proposed. Bankers asked for meetings, their smiles practiced, and their questions veiled in compliments. Remarkable turnaround, they said. A hidden gem. A prime acquisition opportunity. She never raised her voice. She never said no. She said, "This space isn't for acquisition. It's for circulation." They didn't understand. But they didn't need to. Because by then she wasn't building for the boardroom. She was building for the floor plan. Late one evening, she stood outside the same boutique where she was once told she couldn't pay. The door was different now. So was the sign. But she remembered the echo. That echo had built a fire. A long, slow fire that turned shame into structure. She walked past the window and paused, not for revenge, but for measurement. The space had become something new, a co-owned artist residency. Inside, a young girl in overalls was painting in the display window, oblivious to the world. Her strokes slow, intentional. Her canvas lit not by price tags, but possibility. The woman smiled. Because in that moment, she saw it. The full cycle. The blueprint completed. The power transferred. Back at her office, just a converted storage space near the janitor's break room, she opened her laptop and pulled up the next site proposal. An abandoned strip mall across town. More boarded windows. More doubt. Perfect. Because now she had a template. A way to turn insult into investment. Assumption into architecture. And silence into ownership. The city began to shift around her. Not loudly. Not all at once. But in slow concentric circles of change that started from her mall's entrances and rippled outward. Bus lines were rerouted to stop closer. Foot traffic increased not from tourists, but from locals who'd given up on spaces that didn't welcome them until now. She didn't build a brand. She built a standard. Other property owners took notice. Some tried to mimic it. Most didn't understand it. They copied the paint, the signage, the layout, never realizing the foundation wasn't physical. It was ethical. Meanwhile, her second acquisition moved forward. Another dead shopping complex. Another forgotten shell. Another asset left behind by people who failed to see value in anything that didn't glitter. She walked the corridors slowly. This time she brought others with her. Former tenants from the first mall. Artists. Mothers. Librarians. Kids with cardboard prototypes and million-dollar instincts. They mapped the floor together. Plotted not profit but possibility. One space became a communal grocery. Another a health clinic with sliding scale treatment. And where a luxury retailer once pushed perfume, she installed a language learning hub for immigrants navigating new ground. Investors kept calling. One even flew in. Asked her what her exit strategy was. She smiled once. Then showed him a photo. A girl, maybe 9 years old, standing at a kiosk she designed, selling recycled stickers made from scraps she found behind the food court. Next to her was a tip jar filled with coins. Behind her, a sign that read, "She boss." "This is the strategy," she said. He left confused. She left committed. Back at her office, she stared at the balance sheet. It wasn't glowing, but it was solid. The kind of financial health that didn't make headlines but made futures. She reviewed maintenance reports. Checked HVAC schedules. Approved bonuses for the janitorial team. Then looked over a small envelope that had arrived earlier. Inside was a handwritten note. "I remember you. I was the cashier. I'm sorry I didn't see you then. I do now." She folded the note, placed it in the drawer beside her first lease agreement, and closed it without ceremony. That evening, she wandered the mall alone. She didn't check inventory, didn't take meetings. She just sat on a bench near the main fountain and watched. A child dancing in the open space. A teenager nervously handing out samples from her first startup stall. A grandfather fixing a busted wheel on a kiosk cart he co-owned. None of them knew her name, but all of them were living inside her blueprint. And that was enough. Years passed. The mall became a landmark not for luxury but for life. A space that didn't sell aspiration but access. Tourists still didn't come, but community did. Day after day, week after week, people no longer visited just to shop. They came to teach, to gather, to heal, to try. Her name rarely appeared on anything. No plaques. No founder titles. No stylized signatures etched in glass. But her fingerprints were everywhere. In the way people walked in without shrinking. In the way the walls made room for stories, not just sales. In the way 1,000 lives bloomed beneath the same roof once used to shut them out. On her last day as managing owner, she arrived at dawn, same as always. No announcement. No farewell. Just a quiet lap through the corridors. She passed the food court. The bookshop. The old boutique, now repurposed as a youth innovation lab. She watched a girl about 9, braids bouncing, hoodie slightly oversized, give a tour to a new group of kids with notebooks and nervous energy. This was the first store she reclaimed, the girl said, pointing to the corner space. No one in the group asked who. They didn't need to, because the story had outgrown the storyteller. She left the office keys with a custodian. Not because he asked for them, but because she trusted his care. She handed over transition papers to a new director, someone who used to rent a stall here, then became an administrator, then a builder in her own right. And when the final email was sent, she signed it simply. Keep building. Keep reclaiming. The blueprint is yours now. Outside, she didn't look back. The mall didn't vanish behind her. It stood. It thrived. Because she hadn't built an empire. She had built a pattern, one that others could follow, repeat, evolve. And far across town, a new site awaited. Another forgotten structure. Another failed space. She stepped into its shadow, pulled out her notebook, and began to walk. Measuring not square footage, but possibility. Because the truth they never understood? She could always pay. And now? She paid it forward.